Someone say blue pig or something.
Blue pig or something?
Okay, cool.
Or something?
Cool. Yeah, no, because I was talking. I was actively joining the conversation for like 10 minutes. I figured you guys were just like talking over me a bit, and yeah, that was something. Are we already recording?
Yeah.
Sheesh.
Welcome to Tokyo Comic Attack. My name is Mulele.
Also known as Mulele Redux.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I'm Oscar. No, we can go with this.
Okay. Go ahead.
Working hard to make it better. I'm Oscar, also known as Big Fat Dog Comics, and our third member.
I'm Chris. You can also call me Sketch Bro as I go online.
What have we been up to, guys?
I've been working on just illustrating posters and making pages for my various projects, and that's it. How about you guys? Oscar?
Seems like plenty. I've been translating a bunch of my old comics into English, because I usually work straight into Japanese, and then never really bothered translating them until I got a whole bunch and nothing to post. So then I'm stuck translating for a while. So that's what I'm doing now. Just the needs to be done kind of stuff. It's going well enough. Just translating old stuff and trying to build a bit of a media presence online, because I've been neglecting that for way too long. Nothing too fancy outside of that, really. What's going on with you, Chris?
Taking a bit of a break this week. I'm doing smaller color studies and everything. I just finished chapter 2 for my comic, which took a lot of time doing all the color proofs and everything, setting the text, and then going back and re-editing chapter 1 to make sure that it flowed well into chapter 2 and all the spelling mistakes and everything were out. So yeah, I was doing most of that for this week.
What little I've seen of it, it looks really good though.
That doesn't sound like you're taking a break, but yeah, those pages look amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not doing like the comic pages right now. I'm thinking about chapter 3, and I'm going to start on it eventually. But I'm not like drawing comic pages today. Today I'm just doing like color studies. I did the which you guys should check your email, because I just sent you the newer design for the logo for Tokyo Comic Attack.
Nice.
So make sure you check that real quick. Hopefully viewers will see that soon.
Yeah, Chris is doing an amazing logo for this podcast that should be technically up there. You're probably seen it already. Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, it's just one. Hopefully we'll get more different designs up there. So that way we have other things that can just kind of rotate. But just something kind of nice to look at. I've seen other podcasts that just have like the logo that's there. It's nice. But I think for us, if we have other things as well, like something that varies, something that can change, it's a placeholder. If we get tired of it, we can change it.
No, it looks good.
Ever so humble. Yeah, I think it really nails it. Yeah, new name, a new logo. We're
pretty much official now, right?
It will be as soon as I put in the feed.
Yeah, well, we're excited about this. That's the main takeaway. We're really happy to be doing this. So I think, Chris, you finally dug up the thing you wanted to talk about last time and couldn't find last time.
Mulele did it for me. Yes, I'm very happy for that. Thank you very much.
True.
So
So,
I believe
do
that was yeah.
you want to
Yeah,
introduce the topic?
the topic that I wanted to discuss was branched off of what we were doing during the first podcast, which was the idea of character freedom in a story. The second idea was character archetypes, like what like type of characters people are creating and producing for stories, and especially in the modern society, as opposed to like in the 90s or in the 80s. Yeah, that was kind of the idea.
Okay, well, which one do you want to jump into first?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the creative freedom one? Or?
The character freedom?
Yeah.
There's a couple of different branching paths you can go with this. One of the ideas is how much freedom do you give your character in the story to be themselves, and how much of it is like for the story. That's one path when it comes to character freedom.
Sorry, you said character freedom.
Right.
I heard creative freedom.
Yeah. Okay. Creative freedom is also a good idea too.
Sorry, which one are we going with?
Actually, I like
freedom
creative freedom, but yeah. Okay, hold on. Sorry.
Let's flip a coin, I suppose. No, we can go with creative freedom, I suppose. How do we define that though?
Creative freedom is the idea of when you are co-writing a story, or when you are in the pilot seat of the story, how much ability to change, manipulate, design, and lay out the way for the story and the characters and the world like you have. So if you're working in freelance, sometimes you don't have what's called creative freedom. The writer will tell you it needs to look like A, B, and C. However, when you put it down on the page, it doesn't work. And as the artist, you know this a little bit better. So you would ask for a little bit of creative freedom to kind of work with the design or change the design so that it still suits their needs, but it's something that you feel better creating. It's not a restraint that stops you. It's more of something where you work around it to make it still balance, I would say. That was wordy. I'm very sorry.
It's a podcast. It's supposed to be wordy.
It's interesting. Wants to take a bite of that one first. I got some.
What do you got to say?
Sorry.
Well, yeah. What do you got to say, Oscar? You spoke first, so
I'm thinking that it's something I've actually struggled with a lot. Mostly because up until now, my freelance work has not really been comics. So I haven't worked with a lot of writers and everything professionally. So what I'm trying to say is technically I've had all the creative freedom I could possibly want. It's just I'm making these books, making them for myself, usually just selling them at events. Yet I always managed to put myself in some sort of box. And I often had to pull back and be like, hey, you can literally draw and write whatever you want on these pages, and basically no one's going to give a shit. Because you I don't know, you just build these expectations for yourself. You look at other stuff, and you look at, I don't know, maybe you're aiming for a certain genre, and it's like, story builds up like this and these kind of characters, and yeah, me personally, I always feel like I find myself trying to fit in places, and afterwards I will look back and I'm like, why am I trying so hard. Like I could just let go. And actually, I think one of my works actually, Kai, which is this really weird story about a girl, boy girl. It's not even defined. She so basically the set the whole thing out. They walk up to the sea. They kind of like float into the sea, turn into all kind of fish creatures, um, walk out again. It's very short comic, in Riso, so it's very. I printed in Riso, so it's very visual. But I only I only used like a week or something to write it, and that was one of the. I didn't plan anything. I just went page by page, and I forget what the name of those writers were, but there was a certain group of writers who would do this, just write in the moment thing. Um, like don't think about it writing. There's a better name for it, but I can't think of it right now. But the idea is to once you stop and let yourself think, you're like ruining your flow. Um, and I think that's the only book I feel like I really managed creative freedom, in the sense that I just let go for that one. Um, I completely let go. Uh, I had a lot of fun, and I kind of explored stuff. And I feel like in my other books, I'm always struggling to explore, because I end up railing myself in too much. Um, so yeah, I think that's my experiences with creative freedom. That like complete freedom uh, can be hard to wrap your head around in a way. Um, like if you tell yourself you're completely free to do whatever you want, you kind of get decision paralysis, and you just don't know what to do anymore. Um, don't know if you guys ever had one of those, or
Mm, let me see.
when you make your own book, like no other writers or anything involved, does that give you like a sense of liberty and relaxation, or are you
I
kind of
would say
pushing yourself to the point you're like, oh, I want it to be this, but ooh ah, kind of.
I would say no.
Oh, that's interesting. It's just me.
Uh, um, because for me, back back in the 2000s, when I was doing my old comic Neo Arc, which was a fantasy adventure story based off one of my first comic books that I drew when I was a kid. I was doing this, and it was my story. I had full creative freedom, but there was a secondary person creating the story with me that started to rule over what I was doing and how I was doing, and it's the audience. Back in those days, I posted it up on DeviantArt. Some people would look at it, some people would become invested into it, and the fault of being a creative was listening a little bit too much to what they said. And then these people would say this was not good, or oh, I wish this would happen. And if you were, the earlier types, you cave and you start making things geared towards them. So they become your unofficial editor. And then you start losing a bit of the creative freedom because you're listening to what they say, not listening to what you had planned for it. And this was one of the many elements that greatly ruined NeoArc, which told me this story is not viable. I can't do this now. Let me come back to it another time. And maybe I'll do it. But at that time, I ruined the story. I ruined it because I caved way too much to what other people were saying. And I lost that creative freedom. So if you're strong enough to stick to your guns. Like nowadays, I know what my story is. With Relic Hunter Riven, I know where I'm going. I know what I want to do. And there are certain little elements that I can change. but I know where I'm headed, and I know what I want to do. Everything else can be a suggestion, but it shouldn't be, let's say, it shouldn't be a removal of my freedom to do what I have planned for it. I hope that makes sense.
But you do, that's interesting, because you do mention having a plan. So, because I feel like when I mentioned earlier, like the times I felt complete creative freedom is when I'm not even working up a script, when it's just like one page, go from one page to the other and just see what you feel like, kind of thing. But you're talking about like setting out a story for yourself, and then how much of the, if you set out like this is how I want my story to go, how much does that change as you go along? Is kind of what I want to know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, things that you like, things that you want to do, like when it comes to like how the design is or how the style is, that does change. I'm looking at my storyboards that I just did for chapter 2 of Duke and Tamara, and there's a ton of things that I had to change around because it just didn't work or didn't look right, and that's creative freedom. You can change it because you don't have to stick to what you have drawn down in your storyboards or what you have in that plan. I spoke to Ernest of myself. I'm very unorthodox when it comes to making comics. I don't have a script. Never have, never will. I don't do scripts. I did it back in university, and I hated it. I hate writing scripts.
Well, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule that you have to have scripts to do comics.
When you go to school, when you go to university, and anyone who's listening to this who is in university probably has heard this. There's an industry standard, and this is the sort of like clinging bell that your school puts onto you, and that a lot of people put onto you, that says like you have to do it the way the industry does. However, I'll always say, LaShawn Thomas had a kind of Q&A segment where he sat down and he's like, look, I went to art school and I did it by the books, but then I come back to my desk and I want to feel comfortable making this and feel comfortable enjoying myself while making this. I use normal 8.5 by 11 paper and a pencil. I don't use the industry standard comic book paper to make my pages, and I don't use the industry tools to make this. I use what I like. And no one should tell you that you have to use A, B, or C to make what you want to. You use what you want to because it works for you.
Oh, definitely. I think that's not even creative freedom. That's just Well, I feel like school is another can of worms. We should maybe get into it some other day. But
I got a couple of things I want to comment. Just kind of listening to you guys talk about it. As far as creative freedom goes, whether you write a script or you don't write a script, yeah, I understand the industry standard stuff. But essentially, strictly speaking, comics. So LaShawn Thomas does animation, right?
Yeah.
Or does he do comics as well?
Oh, let me double check that. I thought he used to do comics as well, but he does. Yeah, he does now focus on animation.
Okay, it doesn't matter what it is, but basically to say that doing a script is for someone else's approval. But if you're working alone, do it how you do it, and you're absolutely right. If you are working on your thing, and you don't need to share your vision before it's on the page with anybody else, not an editor, not an overseer of any kind, not a collaborator, then you can live on the page. The the freedom of that is really, really wonderful. And I used to do that when I was in high school, and maybe even up until my mid to late 20s, I was doing that stuff. I mean, I didn't debut until I was 29, so I was still technically an amateur artist. But the thing of it is, what I found for myself anyway, is that if I were doing anything more than maybe 10 pages, I began to repeat myself, repeat some of the ideas, repeat some of the scenes. They would be variations of a thing within the same comic rather than having a flow from A to B. And so for me, I had the idea that I couldn't write a script, that I didn't know what a story was. And so I often relied on writers in a lot of my early work. And what I came to understand was that the writers had, I should say, the level of the writer that I worked with was not very high. Some of them were professional, some of them were amateur, but almost none of them were any good. And it was a real confidence booster for me, because if I could walk away from a project saying, man, that motherfucker couldn't write, or especially in some cases where I had to actually fix the plot because the plot was fucked up, I began to realize that I had a sense of story structure, of course, based on film, because, you know, I'm a film buff, but plotting, I can do that.
How would you feel that it influenced your creative freedom over a project to work with a writer, or compared to doing it on your own?
Well, because I could look at the script and say, okay, it has these problems. It could be the fact that I was detached from it emotionally, and I could look at the script and say, okay, it's got these problems, and I have these solutions for these problems, and it would become more of a team effort with the writer. It's a conversation. But after dealing with these writers, and I say deal with because, you know, the writer I'm working with now on another project, he's the writer / producer. I really like his writing. That's for the kids, and his name is Steve. But his writing is much more tight, much more reasoned, and he's actually aiming for something. You can see it on the page, and it's very, very well structured. He worked with an editor for a while, off and on, to kind of shape the script, shape the story. So he really worked on it hard. There have been other writers that I've worked with who seem to kind of shit out a script overnight, and yeah, in the morning it still smelled. But the scripts would more often than not have problems or show the bias of the writer. I've seen all sorts of problems other than just structural problems in the script. Morality problems, problems of extreme racism or extreme sexism, just stuff that kind of comes out when, you know, we all have those moments where we say something a little off. But, you know, on second thought, you're like, wait a minute, no, that's not what I mean. I don't want to say that because that's a fucked up thing to say. And you pull that shit back. But, you know, if you're writing the script that quickly, or if you're that just careless with your work, then that stuff will start to come out in your script.
And do you feel that, like, the complete creative freedom to write whatever you want, kind of, it's not really, how to say it kind of poisons the broth there, or like you should have someone in there to pull you back a little, or?
No, not at all. Because sometimes just the momentum of it will push out a bit of gold. But and your book Kai is a sample of that. And, you know, not to blow smoke, but that one was very well done. And I said it was gold when it was still black and white. And then when you reprinted it in color, I think that's when you finally saw it. that it
Yeah,
was
you
full.
fought hard for that book, man. Thank you very much.
No, but it's an excellent book. And maybe something like that. You cannot sit down and take 3 months and craft a story like that. That has to be more of a story of the moment. But the thing I'm getting at, and I'll wrap it up here.
Okay.
Whatever story you do and however you do it doesn't really matter. Even who you're working with doesn't matter. But whatever that story is, to the person who's reading it, you're basically structuring an argument. You're trying to say something. And if that argument is nonsensical, then you lost the reader. But if the logic is sound, if the structure is complete, if it doesn't contradict itself, then even if the reader isn't fully on board with some of the things that you're saying, at least he or she can understand where you're coming from. It's a reasoned argument that you're presenting. But if you're presenting something that they do like, but it has all sorts of errors and just doesn't work on its own as a story, then they'll disregard it. And I think that's the main thing. Whatever you do, as soon as you put word 1 on the page, word 2 owes a debt to word 1, and so on down the story, until the whole thing either makes sense or it collapses under its own bullshit. And that's the lack of freedom of a story. You're still trying to convince somebody of something.
That's interesting stuff.
Yeah, the convincing part I always agree with, because think about cover artists. Cover artists for some comics are chosen very wisely, and that's how a lot of Marvel comics drew me in when I saw some of the covers of like Ultimate Spider-Man. Amazing cover work. And I opened the page and I was like, wow, it's not the same artist from the cover to the inside.
Yeah.
And same thing with like Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, I'm a strong advocate of, and many, many, many other ones. The cover art was this amazing like gateway to, hey, take a look at this. And if it catches you, then they've got you a little bit. And hopefully they reel you in with the story and convince you to invest in the time and invest in the story afterwards. So I get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think whether it's you're collaborating on something or it's just between the creator and the reader, it's definitely the dialogue that's very important, and maybe like complete creative freedom. Well, there will always be that dialogue, and I guess that is dialogue is as limiting as it is limitless, kind of. Like you push up to the wall of the other person, but that's kind of what drives you forward as well, I feel.
Actually, I would agree with that, and I would say that there's one caveat to my bit that I want to add. So every time you make a story, now I've said this before, so if I've said it on one of the last 2 episodes, well, I'm gonna say it again. Every story, or I should say every product tells 2 stories. And one is the story that was intended, and the other one is the story of the people who made it. And let's take for example, Hellboy. The first Hellboy, Seed of Destruction, was written and drawn by Mike Mignola, but it was scripted by John Byrne. And John Byrne himself, I think in the foreword, I'm not exactly sure where, but somewhere he did say you know, really, he didn't need me for this project. He's fine all on his own. And by the time you get to the next couple of books, you realize that, yeah, Mike Mignola is fine at scripting and it works. And by the end of Hellboy, or I should say the much later bits of Hellboy, where he, I think he dies, he goes to hell, and all sorts of other stuff. Some of the writing is really beautiful, and you can see where Mike Mignola has really dug through art, through literature, through history, to come up with something that moved himself. And to go from that too shy to actually write the words on his own comic to actually pulling something of great value and putting it onto the page, that is an incredible story in and of itself, in and of its own. But, you know, Hellboy is also fun to read. So at a certain point, the creator has earned so much trust with the reader that if that artist then decides to do a one picture of Sesame Street characters per day for a couple of months, we're into it. Even if some of the pictures aren't the great
good ones, yeah.
Yeah, even if the art isn't great sometimes. I mean, I didn't see the Kermit the Frog. I love the Count, but I think there were one or two I was like, no. But I'll be back for the next one.
If you're doing him almost multiple ones a day though, so
yeah, well, I mean, it's not to throw shade at what he's doing right now. It's just to say that it's not quite on the level of Hellboy, but it is nice to see. And there is an appreciation for the artist, even when he's not doing something that you absolutely love, because you've built that relationship through your arguments, through your stories, through your own growth.
Wrap that one up and move on to the stuff we have been enjoying lately. I'll do you all a favor and kick it off myself. A name whose praises I cannot sing enough in general. Abby Howard and her fantastic comic, The Last Halloween. I don't know exactly when she's been updating it, but every now and then I remember how much I love it and I check back on it, and I had a couple of new pages waiting for me. Which was always a great joy. She writes this fantasy webcomic. It's like it starts out about this kid, and on Halloween, like the portal to the monster world opens or something, and monsters kind of start invading the human world. But it strikes this balance between being funny and being genuinely creepy and like horror. She also does like a second comic and like some stuff on Instagram that's just like little jokes, and I think her humor is very good, but at the same time she draws these amazing monsters, which is kind of my thing. I love monsters and I love cross hatching, and my god, is she good at those two things. Her pages are just a joy to watch. If you're into like really detailed, creepy, yet very clean cross-hatchy monsters, definitely check out The Last Halloween. Other than that, what have I been enjoying? Oh yeah, I was mentioning it before. I was checking out the competition a little. The Cartoonist Kfab YouTube channel. It's these two industry guys that they have a lot of interviews. It's mostly American comics, but they also dig into manga and everything. Most of their stuff, I think, is either interviewing creators, but like really big creators. From what I remember, they had Todd McFarlane on, the guy from Savage Dragon, whose name I can't remember, the guy who art directed Mad Max Fury Road, or really worked with that. They seem to love to get all these really old like comic books that were important in the history of comic books, and kind of um, just open them up on camera and go through them, and what the significance was. And they've been helping me to catch up a bit on my general knowledge of American comics, because like I might have mentioned before, I come from a big manga reading background, but I never really got into American comics, and I always feel like I'm still not quite always lagging a bit behind of what's going on there. So it's an interesting channel to kind of jump in and learn some more about history and the important people in more the Western world, even though they do take up occasional Akira or anything else that's really influenced the comic landscape. But I feel like those would be the two names I want to throw out there for this episode: A.B. Howard and the Cartoonist KFab YouTube channel. Check those out if you.
Looking at Cartoonist KFab, that's run by Ed Pisker and Jim Rugg.
It's a wrestling term. K-Fabe maybe, or
okay.
For any wrestling fan, I'm butchering that. Sorry.
Well,
I know it's a wrestling thing.
It's Ed Pisker and Jim Rugg, and I follow Jim Rugg on Instagram, and I think Ed Pisker, he doesn't follow me, but every once in a while he drops a like, which I'm really appreciative of. Yeah, I'm surprised to see that they've got a thing together. Had I known, I would have been watching it a lot earlier. But thanks for the recommend.
That's already one satisfied customer.
That looks really fun.
What have you been enjoying, Mulele?
So I've been watching a lot of TV, not as much TV as I used to, but I mean, I've been watching stuff. It usually takes me about 4 days to finally get to Better Call Saul or something like that. But Better Call Saul is I like that very much. I like hard luck stories about down and out people, which that always seems to be, although he gets into trouble of his own making. But there are a couple of things, though, I do want to point to that were really, really good. So the movie Annihilation with Natalie Portman was directed by someone, I forget his name, but he got his own show called Devs, Devs. It is absolutely gorgeous to look at. The first half of it, can't quite figure out what's going on or why it's happening. But when you do finally figure it out, it falls a little flat. So I would say 80%. And I think it's like an 80-something on Rotten Tomatoes. But for whatever that site is worth. But it is visually stunning. And I like some of the actors in that as well. So I'm watching that every Friday. But the last thing I want to mention, I was looking at the Jake Parker. Yeah, Jake Parker website, his YouTube channel. Maybe an old video, but he was recommending some art of books, and one of the ones he recommended that wasn't over $100 was The Art of Zootopia, which has a lot of illustration, a lot of concept work by Corey Loftus. Corey Loftus is an artist that I follow on Instagram. His work is mind-bogglingly excellent. And the idea that I could get a book of his work was really nice for me. It was $30 on Amazon, and any other time we're not locked down, I would say fuck Bezos and go to a real bookstore. But these are hard times.
Yeah.
So I bit the bullet and got my book today, and it is gorgeous. It not only does it show you beautiful artwork, it also teaches you something about why they made some of the choices that they made, about eye movement, how they structured some of the chaos in the film, in the scenes, how they set things up so um, your mind would move through the scene the way they wanted you to move. Very, very good.
Oh, now I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I follow him on Instagram also. He did a pretty cool job for Inktober as well. And he
Yeah,
has really interesting like animal like humanoids as well.
yeah.
Ah,
Never been so disappointed to hear he had a kid. To hear someone had a kid as when he had a kid, because like suddenly it's like, okay, now the artwork stops and the baby pictures come. But no, he still puts out some artwork, and I'm still digging it, although it's much less. Uh, but the work is phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm currently looking at him on Instagram. He did the 6 fan arts thing, and they're pretty amazing.
Yeah, they
Um,
are.
that's Corey Loftus, Loftis, by the way.
PIS. Yeah.
Yeah,
Took me a few tries. So if anyone is googling that as
yeah,
well,
yeah.
Like
So
it's black and white work. Yeah.
yeah, that's quite an
how
amazing
about
Instagram. That's something to check out.
how about you, Chris?
Okay, I'll keep it short. So for when it comes to video stuff, I'll recommend two things. First thing, there's a segment on YouTube called Zach Morris's Trash. It takes a retrospective of a lot of the episodes of Saved by the Bell and shows you why Zach Morris is a horrible person. Very funny. I love it. It's making me laugh so much. Definitely recommend that. Number two on YouTube is something called Cat Agent. It is an Hollywood agent for cats. It's animated in Flash. It's kind of funny. Um, it's just something to make you laugh for the week, video wise. When it comes to other things, comics, definitely, I still have to say, I'm always an advocator. Please, God, go out and pick up any of the IDW Sonic the Hedgehog comic books and read about the metal virus. It is an awesome, sad story of like the robotic zombie apocalypse taking over with Sonic the Hedgehog characters, and they're doing a great job with the story. Highly recommended. Um, Other than that, I just heard that Hiro Mashima had just started a new book series called Mashima Heroes, which takes three of his main characters from Rave, from Fairy Tale, and from Eden Zero, and puts them together into a world. I don't know how it pans out, but it seems very interesting. I'm thinking about getting a copy of that later. Last but not least, which is probably what I'm going to do immediately as we finish, I finally got my copy of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I'm going to go back and play that
Nice.
and dive into that world because so far I am I'm in for the ride.
Nice.
So that's my recommendations for right now.
All right. Where can people find you?
Well, once again, this is Chris. You can call me Sketchfro. You can find me at Sketchfro on all of the media sources, Twitter, Instagram. You can go to my Patreon, patreon.com/Sketchfro, and support me for as little as $1. And as well, you have gumroad.com/Sketchfro, where you can find some PDF versions of my comics, all at affordable prices. So please, if you read anything, let me know if you like something. Hit me back with a message. Just let me know you liked what I make. All right.
Oscar?
Yeah, I kind of want to steal that last segment there because that's always nice. definitely, in general, just if you have an artist on Instagram or whatever, and you keep sending him likes, sending him or her likes, throw in a comment every now and then. That really makes someone's day. You can find me everywhere at Big Fat Dog Comics. Twitter and I are taking a break, but I might
Romantic
revive that. But I'm
differences.
kind of focusing focusing on Instagram Instagram a little these days, and I'm not sure if it's worth the bother to kind of link all those accounts or whatever. But
I'm
find me
gonna
on
tell you.
Instagram and sorry.
I'm just gonna say, like, I know that Instagram has a instant link, and I'm sorry for interrupting. I know it has an instant link where you can post to Instagram and Twitter at the same time, but when it does that, it doesn't post your images. So take the time. Your fans will really, really appreciate it. Post for a second time on Twitter if you have an image. Don't just let the auto thing on Instagram do it. It's not that good.
Yeah, sure. I think on my side a bit of experimentation is still needed there in general, but
Mm.
Instagram should be up and running. I'm gonna try to post little yonkoma, like one little yonkoma manga a day. Try and keep that up for as long as I can, or as long as my supply lasts. You can also find some PDFs of my old comics on Gumroad, which you can access for $0 and the high price of your email. And that's it for me, I think. Mulele?
Yeah, my name is Mulele Redux on all of my socials, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and now Patreon. My Patreon is a couple of weeks old, and quite a few little mini posts now, and yeah, I guess that's about it. I should say I get into the nuts and bolts of my comic creation, and I can deconstruct everything and talk about how I made it, why I made it, and what are some of the general rules that I have for comics when I read other people's work as well as make my own. I do all that stuff mainly on Patreon or here, but here in a less structured way.
Nice.
All right. I think that wraps us up for today. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Keep
Wash your
sketchy.
hands.
You have been
Cease
Tokyo
cease
Comic
the
attacked.
Wait a minute. You have been Tokyo Comic attacked?